now we're going to look at how the sociological perspectives would look at issues of race and ethnicity. And we've got functionalists again, and they would look at the issue of ethnic enclaves in an interesting way. If you think about ethnic enclaves, what we've seen with the history of multiculturalism and even the growth of it is that kind of something that the symbolic interactionists would say, the idea of birds of a feather flock together. If you know that saying, the idea of solidarity and leads to sort of identity, and that's really important because you're sharing that culture, those symbols of that culture, and you are coming to Canada, you want to have culturally relevant services, people who speak your language, they become a key social resource in finding jobs and opportunities, and so we have these ethnic enclaves. And for the functionalists, that can be a good thing because in a way, it creates what they love to see is relative harmony and stability, even if some might think that there's segregation. Okay, so that's sort of one approach to the diversity of ethnicities for the functionalists. I mentioned with the symbolic interactions over here, they're looking at this idea of solidarity and the sense of togetherness, but then of course, the flip side could be a kind of us versus them approach, in which because everyone is just sort of sticking with their sort of own kind, so to speak, their own ethnic group, they don't get to learn about each other. The feminists would look at how does ethnicity connect with gender, so the kind of what's called sort of the intersectionality of identities and how they play. And the postmodernists would say that, well, just like because they're concerned about the individual experience, how do people reimagine their identities in Canada? So right now, here we are, a new land, a new space. They're not necessarily, you know, they're not necessarily responding to their homelands directly. Of course, you have the satellite televisions and the internet, all those digital cultures whereby you can maintain your identities, but you also have the possibility to reimagine them in Canadian contexts, with the different kinds of ethnicities that are here. So there's a lot of play and imagination, creativity that's possible here with the postmodern perspective. And the conflict one, again, is looking at the kind of the divisions that are created. And one of the things would be what happens in the job market. So they often talk about the two-tier job market. So that, for example, those that have been here longer, if you remember that vertical mosaic idea that are sort of higher up, they're going to have more power and prestige, so they're going to have an advantage in the job market. And so they're going to get the jobs where there's more autonomy, security, room for growth, whereas a lot of our newcomers to Canada who may not have the language skills, who may not have what we call the Canadian experience, get stuck on the sort of the lower tier, which is jobs where they're more what we'll talk about also precarious. They may not have that same opportunity to grow, and they're often paid differently. And so things like the immigrant wage gap is the divide between what newcomers might get paid and more established Canadians. So these are kinds of the sociological perspectives on it. And if you think about the other kinds of issues in terms of racism, just a little here. I'm just going to put a little area here for that. I want you to think about institutional racism, where it's things like what are the impacts of these ideas of hierarchies and inequalities when they're played out things like in our institutions like schools, our courts, the police, which has been under the microscope lately, our hospitals. We don't have formal racism where it's legislated by the government, but given our ideas and given people's experience of ethnicity and race, do we have manifestations of that inequality? Do we have manifestations of that vertical mosaic playing out? Do certain groups get more opportunity? Do other groups have more disadvantage? That would be the impact or the effect of institutional racism playing out. So the individual racism might just be, a racial slur, a comment someone makes one-on-one, that's at the individual level. But more pernicious would be this institutional racism, whereby our institutions are kind of meeting out racial inequalities by virtue of how they operate. So I hope that gives you a bit of perspective of race and ethnicity in contemporary Canada, connecting the older notion of the vertical mosaic with a little bit of understanding of the 5 sociological perspectives and how they interpret race and ethnicity as well. So thanks for listening.